You brought annulment papers to my baby shower. In my house. You just signed away everything you thought you had power over.
There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room full of women the moment one of them realizes she is being humiliated in front of everyone she loves. It is not the silence of shock. Shock is loud in its own way, full of gasps and quick glances. This silence is different. It is the silence of 40 guests trying to decide whether what they just witnessed actually happened, and whether it is safe to breathe until someone tells them how to feel about it. That silence fell over the private garden room at the Alden House in Charleston on a warm Saturday afternoon in April, at exactly the moment Carol Whitfield placed a manila envelope on the gift table between a diaper cake and a stack of unopened cards, and asked her son's 7 months pregnant wife to open it in front of everyone. Her name was Naomi. She was 29 years old, 6 days from her third trimester, wearing a pale green dress her sister had helped her choose because it did not press too tightly against her stomach. She had spent the morning arranging place cards and tasting cake flavors, and believing, the way people believe things right up until the moment they are proven wrong, that this was simply going to be a beautiful afternoon. She did not know yet that her mother-in-law had spent 3 weeks planning something else entirely inside the same hour. She did not know that the papers in that envelope were not congratulations. She did not know that Carol had chosen this venue on purpose, believing it belonged to strangers, believing there would be no one in that room who could stop her. She was about to learn how wrong a person can be while still being completely certain of themselves. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, we tell true-to-life stories about the moments that quietly change everything, the ones nobody sees coming until they are already standing inside them. Stay with us. This one is going to surprise you more than once. The Alden House had been in Naomi's family for 11 years. Her grandmother had restored it board by board after it sat empty for a decade, and when she passed, she left it to the one grandchild who had spent every summer of her childhood sanding its floors beside her, instead of asking when they could leave. Naomi ran it quietly, without her married name on a single document, because she had learned early in her relationship with Carol that anything Naomi built was, in Carol's eyes, something to be evaluated, priced, and eventually diminished. So she said nothing. She let her mother-in-law believe the venue belonged to a rental company 2 towns over. She let her believe a great many things. It would take one envelope, opened in front of 40 guests, for all of it to stop being a secret at all. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Naomi had married Ethan Whitfield 3 years earlier, in a small ceremony neither of their families fully approved of, for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with what each side believed the other side lacked. Ethan's mother Carol came from a family that had once held real standing in Charleston, the kind of standing built on inherited property and country club membership rather than anything currently being earned. That standing had thinned considerably over 2 decades of bad investments and a divorce that cost more than anyone in the family liked to discuss. But Carol had never adjusted her bearing to match her circumstances. She still spoke as though she were entertaining. She still dressed as though photographers might arrive. And she had never, not once in 3 years, managed to hide the particular disappointment she felt toward the young woman her son had chosen, a woman with no name anyone recognized and no family anyone had heard of, who worked what Carol referred to at dinner parties as event coordination, as though the words themselves were slightly embarrassing to say aloud. What Carol did not know, because Naomi had never told her, was that event coordination was Naomi's polite shorthand for owning and personally operating one of the most sought-after wedding and celebration venues on the Eastern Seaboard. She did not know that brides waited 14 months for a Saturday slot at the Alden House. She did not know that Naomi had turned down 2 national magazine features because she preferred her grandmother's home to stay a working secret rather than a landmark. She did not know any of this, because Naomi had made a quiet decision early in her marriage that her mother-in-law's approval was not something she was willing to purchase with information. She would rather be underestimated than owned. She would learn, on the day of her own baby shower, exactly how expensive that quiet decision could become, and exactly how well it would protect her when it mattered most. 3 weeks before the shower, Carol had sat in her attorney's office with a folder of documents she had been assembling in secret since the wedding announcement. She told the attorney, a longtime family friend named Harold Bishop, that she wanted the marriage examined, that she had reason to believe Naomi had married Ethan under what she called false representations, and that with a grandchild now on the way, the family's assets needed protecting before it was too late. Harold, who had known Carol for 30 years and had learned not to argue with her once her mind was made, drew up the paperwork she requested. It was not, strictly speaking, an annulment. It was a set of aggressive prenuptial-style conditions dressed in the language of one, designed to be presented as an ultimatum, timed for a moment when Naomi would have no room to argue, surrounded by witnesses, exhausted, pregnant, and cornered. Carol chose the baby shower for a reason. She believed a public setting would strip Naomi of any defense. That embarrassment would do the work confrontation alone could not. She had researched venues for the shower herself, insisting on handling the booking personally, telling Ethan it would be her gift to the family. She found the Alden House through a friend's recommendation, was told it was independently owned, and never once thought to ask by whom. She walked through the garden room during her site visit and complimented the restored wood floors to a venue manager who introduced herself only as Naomi's associate, never realizing she was complimenting Naomi's own grandmother's craftsmanship to Naomi's own staff. It was, in hindsight, the first small crack in a plan built entirely on assumptions Carol had never bothered to verify. If this story has already made you sit forward, you are exactly the kind of viewer we make these videos for. Stay with us. What happens next in that garden room is only the beginning of what Carol is about to learn about the family she thought she controlled. The morning of the shower began, for Naomi, the way most mornings at the Alden House began, with a walk through the property before staff arrived, checking the roses along the garden wall, running her hand along the porch railing her grandmother had sanded twice, because the first pass had not satisfied her. Naomi's sister Julia arrived at 9 to help with final touches, and the two of them worked through the morning in the easy rhythm of people who had spent a lifetime setting up rooms together for other people's celebrations, never quite imagining one would someday be their own. By 11, guests began arriving. Colleagues from Naomi's small circle, cousins from her mother's side, a handful of Ethan's relatives, and Carol, who arrived precisely on time in a cream-colored suit, carrying the manila envelope inside a designer handbag, as though it were simply another gift. For the first hour, everything unfolded exactly as a baby shower should. There was cake, and games involving guest measurements of a growing belly, and a slideshow Julia had put together of Naomi's pregnancy over the past 7 months. Carol smiled through all of it with the practiced warmth of a woman performing hospitality, rather than feeling it, watching the clock, waiting for the moment she had planned for weeks. That moment arrived just after the gifts had been stacked and the guests had settled with plates of cake, when Carol rose from her seat, tapped her glass with a spoon, in the manner of someone about to deliver a toast, and asked for everyone's attention. She said she had something important for Naomi, something the whole family should witness together, because family, she said, deserved honesty above all else. She placed the envelope on the gift table. She asked Naomi to open it. Naomi, who had spent 3 years learning to read her mother-in-law's tone the way sailors read weather, felt something tighten in her chest before she even touched the paper. Julia, standing beside her, reached instinctively for her sister's free hand. Ethan, seated near the back of the room beside his father, did not move, and would later admit that some part of him had known this moment was coming, and had chosen, out of a lifetime of conflict avoidance with his mother, to say nothing until it was already happening in front of 40 people. Naomi opened the envelope slowly. Inside were 8 pages, drafted in the careful language of a document meant to look more binding than it actually was, outlining conditions Carol wanted imposed on the marriage before the child arrived. Financial disclosures, a post-nuptial agreement redirecting future assets, a clause suggesting the marriage be formally reviewed by both families' attorneys within 90 days of the birth, with the implicit threat that failure to comply would result in the Whitfield family withdrawing all support, financial and otherwise, from both Naomi and the child. Carol had rehearsed this moment as an act of protection. What the room actually witnessed was a mother attempting to leverage her son's family, her own future grandchild, and 40 witnesses to force a young pregnant woman into signing away her standing in her own marriage. Naomi read every page in silence. The room, which had been warm and full of chatter minutes earlier, went completely still. Carol had expected tears, or perhaps a quiet, grateful acceptance of what she believed was a generous offer of continued family support in exchange for reasonable safeguards. She had not expected the particular quality of calm that settled over Naomi's face. Instead, the calm of a woman who has just been handed proof of exactly what she had always suspected and has finally been given permission to stop pretending otherwise. We are just getting started, and the moment that follows is the one this entire story has been building toward. If you have not subscribed yet, now is the time, because you will not want to miss where this goes next. Naomi set the pages down on the gift table beside the diaper cake. She looked at Carol for a long moment, then at Ethan, whose eyes had finally lifted to meet hers, carrying an expression somewhere between shame and helplessness that told her everything about how long he had known this was coming and how little he had done to stop it. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She asked Carol, in a tone even and clear enough for the entire room to hear, whether she had chosen the Alden House herself for this occasion. Carol, thrown slightly by the question, said that she had wanted everything to be perfect for her son's family. Naomi asked if she had enjoyed the garden room. Carol said it was lovely, one of the finest venues she had ever booked. Naomi nodded slowly, then told her that she was glad Carol approved because the venue belonged to her. The silence that followed was different from the silence that had come before. It was the silence of an entire room recalculating in real time. Naomi explained, simply and without theater, that the Alden House had been her grandmother's property, restored by her grandmother's own hands, left to Naomi alone 11 years earlier, and operated by Naomi ever since under a business name that had nothing to do with the Whitfield family or any family Carol had ever bothered to research. She explained that brides across 3 states waited more than a year for a single Saturday in that garden room. She explained that the woman Carol had spoken to during her site visit, the one she complimented on the floors, was not an employee but Naomi herself, introduced under a working title, precisely because Naomi had learned, over 3 years of marriage, that some information was safer kept private from people who treated worth as something to be measured and ranked. Carol's composure, so carefully constructed over decades of practiced bearing, did not collapse all at once. It fractured the way porcelain fractures, in a single hairline crack that widened slowly under continued pressure. She said this could not be true. She looked to Ethan for confirmation, and Ethan, who had known for years and had simply never found the right moment to mention it to his mother because some part of him had always understood how she would react, said quietly that it was true, that it had always been true, and that he was sorry he had never said so. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video if Naomi's calm in that room struck you the way it struck us. What Carol does next, and what Naomi ultimately decides about her marriage, is coming up, and it is not what most viewers expect. What happened over the following hour became, among the small circle who witnessed it, the kind of story retold at every family gathering for years afterward. Naomi did not ask Carol to leave. She did not raise her voice or demand an apology in front of the guests, though she would have been entitled to both. Instead, she simply thanked everyone for coming, asked the staff to continue serving cake, and invited Carol to step outside to the garden with her, alone, where the two of them stood among the roses Naomi's grandmother had planted decades earlier and had the conversation that should have happened years before it did. Naomi told Carol plainly that she had spent 3 years absorbing small corrections and quiet judgments in the hope that patience would eventually earn her a place in the family she had married into. She told her that the papers on the gift table were not the injury. The injury was the belief beneath them. The assumption that Naomi's worth in that family had always been conditional, negotiable, something to be formalized in writing the moment it became inconvenient. She told Carol she was not interested in revenge, not interested in taking the Alden House away from future family gatherings out of spite, because she had built that place to hold love, not to withhold it. But she was finished pretending small slights did not accumulate into something real. She told Carol that going forward, respect would not be optional, and it would not be something she had to earn twice. Carol stood among the roses for a long time before she spoke. When she finally did, her voice carried none of the polish it had carried at the podium an hour earlier. She admitted that she had let her own fear of losing standing in the family translate into control over people who had never threatened her standing at all. She admitted that Naomi's quiet nature had never been the absence of substance Carol assumed it to be, but simply a kind of strength she had never learned to recognize because it did not look like the loud, performative confidence she had been raised to respect. It was not a complete transformation delivered in a single afternoon. Real change rarely is. But it was, Naomi would say later, the first honest conversation the two of them had ever had in 3 years of trying to avoid exactly this one. Ethan's reckoning came later that evening, after the last guests had gone and the garden room had been cleared. He told Naomi he had known about his mother's plan for nearly 2 weeks and had said nothing, hoping it would somehow resolve itself before it reached her. Naomi told him that hope was not the same as protection, and that a husband who watches a plan like that unfold without warning, his wife has already made his choice about whose comfort matters more. It was the beginning of a longer conversation between them, one that did not resolve in a single night, but one that both of them understood needed to happen if the marriage was going to survive the child now only weeks away. The baby arrived in early June, a girl, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with her mother's calm eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Carol was present at the hospital, seated quietly in the corridor rather than the room, waiting to be invited in rather than assuming the invitation as her right for the first time in longer than anyone in the family could remember. When Naomi finally called her in to meet her granddaughter, Carol stood beside the bed for a long moment before she spoke, and what she said was simply that the child was beautiful and that she was grateful to be allowed in the room. It was a small sentence, but everyone who heard it understood exactly how far it had traveled to be said at all. The Alden House continued to host weddings and celebrations for years afterward, its garden room filling every Saturday with families who had waited more than a year for the privilege, most of them never knowing that the quiet woman who occasionally walked the grounds checking the roses was the same woman who had once stood in that very room and, without raising her voice, changed the terms of her entire family's future. Naomi never told the story publicly. She did not need to. She had learned long before that morning in April that the people who truly knew her worth had never needed convincing, and the people who did need convincing were rarely worth the effort of trying. What mattered in the end was not the envelope, or the papers, or even the venue itself. What mattered was a daughter, born into a family finally willing to be honest with itself, and a mother who had never once needed anyone's permission to know exactly who she was. Thank you for spending this time with us today. If Naomi's story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment telling us what part stayed with you the longest. Subscribe for a new story every week, because we have many more like this one waiting for you. Until next time, take care of yourself, and take care of the people who deserve it.